2, 3.
Cause I'ma dig deep, I'ma stand tall. I got the grit of the underdog. I'm stronger than you think, I can do this on my own. There's a difference between loneliness and doing this alone.
Hello everyone! Welcome to the Capital Group Collective presents DC Music Rocks podcast. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Andrew Toy. Andrew Toy is a session drummer, percussionist, and solo performer based in the Washington, D.C. area. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Ting. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, tell us how you got started in music.
Sure. So, I'll give kind of like the brief rundown. I probably started with music the same way most kids did. I grew up in the 90s, listening to a lot of alt rock, heavy metal, grunge, things like that. Started playing drums in school, nothing too exciting, but, it kind of kept snowballing and, kind of got deeper and deeper into this like musical world and, making new friends and connections, listening new music and really kind of connecting with the drums more than anything else. And, throughout high school and college, playing in different kind of like local rock bands and, playing with most of the time musicians a lot older than me, that really kind of started to expand my world. So that, it kept growing and it's always been just like kind of like a growing process. I feel like any musician can probably relate. And then, after I was out of school, I started playing on cruise ships. I did that for a couple years.
That's awesome.
Just kind of traveling the world, playing, mostly cheesy music, but still like, just playing like all the time and meeting lots of different musicians from around the world. And I think that's probably one of the best things for me. It's just, getting some fresh perspective, like outside of my my little hometown in Delaware. But, just like, people from different parts of the world listening to different kinds of music and, everybody is kind of like learning from everybody else. So that's
awesome.
Been kind of the gist of like, the theme, I guess, like ever since then has just been like expanding, like just trying to go in any direction, getting outside of my musical comfort zone. But and that hasn't stopped, and I hope that'll never stop. But I started out with just like anybody else, just some kid looking for something to do.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that as musicians, there's always something to learn from music, or just even like for other artists as well. Where did the cruise ships travel to?
So I did that for a couple years, so I got to see most of the routes that ships tend to go to. So all 7 continents, 70 plus countries.
Oh my gosh!
But yeah, luckily I was able to arrange it so I wasn't just like hanging out in the Caribbean all the time, but I was doing some cruising in Africa and South America and Southeast Asia and South Pacific and places like that. So that was cool because really next to music, my biggest inspiration and passion is travel. So that's something, I feel like one hand kind of feeds the other. So I was very fortunate, as somebody in their early 20s to kind of travel the world playing drums.
And still work at the same time.
Yep. And then, come back and get on stage every night.
That's awesome. Did you go to China?
Yes, but just briefly. I went to Shanghai, and then I guess the closest next to that is we went to Hong Kong. But not a whole lot of time in China. I think there's a lot of like I don't know, a lot of extra paperwork or things.
Oh yeah.
Because I know that's one of the. I think that was the only place I had to get like a visa for, just as like somebody just there for one day.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
So it's I mean, I think it was maybe just American crew members had to get visas, even just for one day of shore leave. So yeah, unfortunately, I haven't spent a whole lot of time in China, but of course, that's high up on the list. When conditions improve, I'd love to spend an extended period in China.
Yeah, China, you have to spend at least a month to go to different cities because they're also different.
Right.
Like
you can
Hong
never
Kong.
take like a week or even like a month and say like, oh yeah, I've done China. That's. I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can really. I mean, it's obviously
huge.
like a vast and amazing place.
Yeah. So, do you have any music idols or influences for your music?
Absolutely. So just I think mixing influences is kind of where a lot of the magic happens, and just like listening to a lot of like different things. But as far as just like, kind of ways of thinking or ways of approaching music, I'm a big fan of Brian Eno. Just the idea of like using the studio as an instrument itself, and a lot of his more like experimental and ambient sort of things. Minimalist composers like Steve Reich and Philip Glass are big inspirations for me. And then, there's probably a whole lot more like I guess obvious influences, like a lot of the drumming greats,
Right.
As far as like drumming greats, I take a lot of inspiration from Glenn Coche, who's the drummer from Wilco, and he plays solo music as well. He's a great composer in his own right. So that's, he really bridges that gap between drummer and a proper musician. Not that a drummer is anyway. There's jokes there, but yeah, I mean, he's a drummer that like does like complete like musical things that are amazing. So him, other big one, especially growing up, was Stephen Perkins, who's a drummer for Jane's Addiction and Porno for Pyros. So just like really like aggressive kind of like tribal approach to the drums. So those are a couple like big ones for me. And all the great like rock and metal drummers and all that sort of stuff as well. But those are some of the big ones for me.
So you're inspired by everybody. No.
Try to be. Just take a little bit, just steal a little bit from everybody, and kind of throw everything into the pot and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's what music is, right? We're all inspired by each other.
Absolutely.
It's not like we're playing music in our own little cubicle and no one's allowed to touch it or listen to it and be inspired by it. I think that's the beauty of music. We're all inspired by each other.
And I think just like kind of like, embracing like influences and like what makes you like unique, not being like, oh, like I'm not enough this, or like I'm not enough like that. Like who cares? Like, it's like, there's nobody's like an imposter. Like you're going to play whatever it is that you're playing the way you play it. And that's something that like everybody should just like kind of value.
Yeah, I wish I heard that from you earlier. Like, earlier in my music career, because I remember I wanted to sound like somebody and then I felt like I wasn't sounding like that somebody. So then why try?
Right.
So that's, yeah.
Because even if like, you can't sound like, such and such, great singer, they can't sound like you. So that's something to like really like take to heart,
Yeah, and
it's
the
like,
audience probably don't want more of that somebody.
Exactly.
They want something different, right?
The world only needs one of fill in the blank,
Yeah, exactly.
So like, but there's only one you, so cherish that.
Yes. Thank you. We got a little philosophical there. I love it. So how have you evolved in your music career, you think?
So really, the main theme that's come up so many times is like, getting outside of my comfort zone and like taking on maybe gigs that I didn't think, and this kind of goes back to the last thing, is like I didn't feel either qualified for, or I didn't think were like, the right fit. But it's like, you do something, you bring whatever you have to the table, and it's going to be its own thing. It's going to sound like you're bringing your own style to whatever it is you're playing. So like for instance, a few years ago, a bagpiper approached me about playing kind of like Renaissance music, but playing like a tapan,
Wow.
which is like a big bass drum. Good friend of mine who goes by the name Piper Jones from Asheville, North Carolina. So like at first I'm like, wow, this is like just so random and outside of anything I've ever done. Like I don't know, like should I even bother? But then like, got into it, and like, of course at first it's like, it's this big learning experience, but after, now I've played hundreds of shows with them. It's like, now it's like,
Wow.
like now it feels like I kind of started to own it at some point. So that's something that like, it's maybe unrelated in some ways to everything else I do, but it maybe helps or informs like the other things that I do. So like, there's really no harm in like trying to take on something that's like completely different. So just stretching in different directions. I think, that's really important for growth. I mean, it's important also for practical concerns. If anybody wants to be a working professional,
you kind of have to like go with the flow. Mm-hmm.
Right. And just kind of take, not like take everything that comes like in a kind of a scavenger kind of way, but take everything that comes as in like, is this something that I can learn from?
Right.
So that's always like how I approach it. Like, if I get some sort of offer or somebody approaches me, it's like, okay, like what can I learn from this? And if it's just like, no, like this is just some like boring thing that's been done a million times, it's like, you know what, no, that's okay. But if it's something that's like, there's some sort of like interesting angle here, or something where, it's maybe a skill that I haven't developed, it's like, okay, like that's something that's going to help. Because really it's like, even like I said, like if it seems unrelated, everything's related musically. So it's like you can't really like spend time in like one like style or one genre and not have it like in some subconscious way affect everything else you do. So that's
Very true.
yeah. So it's always good to just like expand. So I think that's as far as like how I've evolved. That's one thing there. But besides that, like like more specific to like my solo music that I do, that maybe I started doing that in 2016, and a little bit as like a maybe a challenge to myself, like, oh, like can I actually do this? Can I make like music from just the drums? And then
Well, yes, you can.
yeah, right. It's just like and then that's the sort of attitude you need is it's like, yeah, sure I can. What the hell? And that's where it's just like throw caution to the wind and just like what, I'm going to do this, and if it sounds cool, great. If not, well, at least it's something that I did, and like I can actually I didn't just phone it in. So that kind of like evolved. I started playing some solo shows between then and now, and then of course this year with all the time away from gigs, that's when I was able to focus on actually recording and like really developing some ideas. So that's been and then for that just with the solo stuff, just kind of going down like rabbit holes. I feel like that's like the best thing, like improvising, saying like, oh, this is a sound that I'm going to explore. Like this is a structure that like, I haven't really explored yet. And then, just seeing where it goes, like kind of like not overthinking it and just kind of letting the music dictate like what's going to happen. So I guess, as much as an overused term, like it's an organic evolution. So it's just like, like one idea might grow into 10 others. And it's the sort of thing that you can't really like script or predict or anything like that. So that's the sort of thing. And it's been great. Like obviously, if you're working on your own music, there's no outside influence like trying to like pull it in any certain direction. And there's no like pressure to like make some magic like right this moment or whatever. It's just like it can kind of whenever it's ready, whenever inspiration is there, it can kind of grow. So that's kind of the way I approach it, and I love that sort of like freedom. I mean, I'm not, a hermit. I love playing with other people. I love like collaborating and stuff like that. But at least for my own stuff, like it's great just to have this sort of like outlet that there is no sort of like there's no like predefined path. There's no guardrails, which is kind of where I took the title for my album. So like
Nice.
it's like just totally like free to like explore in any direction. So that's so I guess as far as like evolving, it's kind of like not setting any limits or not setting any of those guardrails for yourself.
That's awesome. I mean, that's also the beauty of an independent artist versus, if you're under a label or, record company where you're pressured to produce certain type of music or a certain timeline.
Right.
That's what I love about it.
Yeah, and that's not. I mean, I've kind of thought about it a lot, where it's just like, because I mean, everybody, it's very common to kind of like, complain about like the current state of like music and stuff like that. It's like, oh, like, nobody's making any money and blah, blah, blah. It's all streams and social media, all this kind of stuff. And that's true. And there's parts of that that are, kind of lame. But it's also, I mean, without any sort of like, record labels or these like traditional like people kind of pulling the strings or, the purse strings or whatever, it just like you're kind of free, and like everybody putting out their own music, and obviously like you can just like by yourself like produce something, put something out, put it on the internet with kind of like minimal sort of like equipment or like upfront cost. It really does free up any kind of like creativity that might have been like stifled by like the more like a traditional approach. So it's like in some ways like it's a hard time to be a musician, of course, especially this year. But it's also like it's great because because the internet, and because like recording equipment is like a lot more affordable than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. So there's good and bad for every era, I guess. But yeah, when somebody's doing it independently, there's options.
So on the topic of pandemic, as you were mentioning, how has the pandemic affected your music career this year?
Sure. So Obviously, like it sucks in a lot of ways, like gigs canceled, stuff like that. Uh, but besides that, besides like those obvious things, like it's been great. And like I feel guilty saying like anything in 2020 has been great,
Right.
but I mean, just being able to just focus on my own music and my own sound, and not just like have feel like I had to like hustle all these gigs together or something like that, or do like the usual kind of like musician grind. That's been great. So I've still been able, again, thanks to technology, I've been able to teach remotely. I've been able to record drums remotely for people, all from my own space.
Right.
So that's been great. So it hasn't been like it hasn't been a terrible thing for me. So if anything, like just kind of like having some time to like step back, kind of reflect or rethink things or whatever, reevaluate. That's been cool, and I think that sort of like introspection is going to help a lot of it probably already has helped a lot of musicians in this past year. So that's been cool, and just like time to kind of reset and slow down, and for myself, spend time with my kids, which is great, so that's it's been a mixed bag this past year.
Yeah, it's actually refreshing to hear. You say that there's beautiful things in 2020. I also think there's beautiful, awesome things that came from 2020, and as musicians, we're also people, right? So, like you said, the usual grind is to run from gig to gig and then record and then this and that. Like you're always busy, but I think there's beauty in like spending time with family, doing things that are non-music related,
Right.
because that will nourish us as musicians and
Absolutely.
find
Yeah.
inspiration and like keep going.
Right on. Yeah. I mean, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100% what you said.
So you'd mentioned you would collaborate with other artists too. What type of artists do you usually collaborate with? And when I say collaboration, I guess maybe something that's more like not so much you jumping on other people's tracks, but
Mm-hmm.
more maybe like working together half and half, like
Sure.
maybe write music together and such.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll collaborate, make music with anybody that I think is interesting.
Hmm.
That's doing something cool. So I've worked with some more straight ahead kind of musicians, and some more like experimental ones.
Mm,
In the DC area, I've done some work with Eli Lev, great singer songwriter, Lisa Saeed, another great front
yes.
woman, and I've played. I've done a little bit of touring with a band called Pigeon Kings, which I was one of the founding members, and that's a kind of a Celtic sort of roots rock sort of thing. So basically, like a fiddle band, so fiddle, banjo, mandolin. So
Wow.
but like a really like kind of a live band, like a really
Hmm.
like exciting kind of. I mean, because it's a string band, but there's drums. So it's more of like a kind of amped up sort of rock and roll sort of thing. So
Fun.
that's been a fun one. Yeah, and like of course all the festival dates were all canceled this year. But
Yeah.
so those are some ones. I just started making some music and kind of putting stuff together with a local bassist, guy named Doug Kalmeyer. Just kind of like a live drum and bass kind of thing. So he's a guy that also plays occasionally just solo, just using the bass guitar, and doing a lot of like experimental stuff. So it's just like kind of bringing our two worlds together, where it's obviously different instruments, but we're both used to doing a lot of things on our own. So that's very much in its kind of like beginning sort of stages. So that'll be curious to see like what happens there. But yeah, just and then I did a little bit of remote collaborating. I recorded an album with a percussionist in the area, Jason Mullinex, who does. He's a percussionist, but he does a lot of synth stuff and a lot of ambient stuff. So we did some recordings where I did some live drums and percussion with that. So very much like a percussion album. So
Fun.
there's that. Yeah, a couple other odds and ends, but yeah, basically anybody that's interesting, anybody that like digs what I do, and we kind of see what happens. You never know unless you try, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe one day we'll collaborate too.
Heck yeah, heck yeah.
Maybe do some Chinese like instrumental drum percussion, like
I love it, and one of my favorite percussionist in the area, this guy named Tom Teasley, great percussionist, and he actually has a duo with and I forget the name of the instrument, but the group is called Dong Shi.
I saw
Okay.
them before.
Oh,
Yeah,
great. Okay. I forget. Yeah, I know it's like it's a string instrument. I forget what it's called. It's probably got a beautiful name.
I should know.
But anyway,
I should know.
but obviously, I mean, they're doing this like obviously like this incredible East meets West kind of thing.
Yeah, I love
so
that.
yeah, it's great. I mean, it's just like taking like two independently like badass players, seeing what happens when you bring them together. So yeah,
That's right.
You never know.
So on the topic of like talking about DMV artists, musicians, what do you think makes this area so special?
So I and we were talking a little bit about this. So like DC, I feel like is one of those like the size is just right type cities.
Yeah.
It's big enough where there's kind of a scene for everything. There's some sort of like niche for like whatever you can imagine. But it's small enough that it's not like it's not as like anonymous or as like too cool for school as like New York City or like LA. People still know your name. It's people still like have scenes and like things like that. So I feel like it is like kind of like just the right size. And not to mention like being such like a transient and like international city, obviously yourself included. I mean, you get all these like cool people from all over the world bringing their own thing to the mix.
That's
so
right.
that's such like an invaluable thing, because like we were saying before with like just influences and like the big like melting pot. So I mean, nobody's from DC, so it's like everybody is bringing something to the mix. And you never know what's going to happen. I've met folks from kind of all over the world, and yeah, everybody can learn something from everybody, which
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, and I know, I mean, it's probably similar in other big cities, but I feel like especially DC, and there's maybe a little bit of that, like, there's definitely a lot of that, like, kind of do-it-yourself mentality as well. And I know that that exists other places, but in DC with like the house shows and like like the early hardcore scene and stuff like that, it's like people are used to kind of fending for themselves in some ways, which you get that independent spirit, which is so cool.
Yeah, I feel like there's no pressure maybe in other major music cities here that it's like you can make a name for yourself. People, like you said, people will know your name. You feel like you have a space to express yourself and create the kind of music you want instead of like, oh, I have to do this in order for this label or record company to notice me.
Right.
I'm sure there's a lot of that competitiveness, that pressure that I feel like doesn't really exist here.
Right.
Which allows artists to be more creative and unique and really do what they love to do.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that's what it's all about, is just like people that are in it for the right reason. People are being creative, they're making new things, they're not like necessarily like trying to make it like, oh man, I'm going to make it like, I got to impress this person and do this X, Y, and Z and well, whatever. Because that's that's for the big cities.
Yeah.
Like people here are cool and they're doing stuff for cool reasons.
Well, also I think like a lot of people here, I'm speaking from my personal experience, but I don't know if other people have the same experience, but like a lot of us have a job and then like we do music on the side and then hopefully create that, slowly creating that into a career. So maybe financial, stress is a little bit less here because I feel people get real jobs here.
Sure. Yeah.
So anyways, so what other music talents do you have? I'm curious.
Not a whole lot. I'm a drummer and a percussionist, and I don't really pretend to be much otherwise. Like when I play other instruments, it sounds like a drummer is playing it. But and the same thing where it's like like oh like not hiding your influences. Like I'm not going to pretend I'm anything else. Like but that's something like by approaching everything like a percussionist, I feel like that can be a good thing. So like even when I like attempt to like produce something, or whatever, like I feel like I'm listening for the same things I listen for when I'm playing a percussion instrument, like mostly like textures. So I feel like that's a big part of like, I guess my musical talent, I suppose, is like just like listening for like textures, like what do things sound like what little variations can you make to like just like a single sound to like just like exploit it as much as possible. So yeah, so for me, drums, percussion, and percussion like hand percussion and things like that. That's been, especially in the past like maybe even like 5 years is when I've really like kind of gotten into more of that, because I played drum set most of my life. But percussion, it's kind of a small leap from the drum set. We're just hitting different things. But
I
but
mean,
yeah.
I'm looking at a room full of instruments,
Oh sure.
and you're telling me, oh, I'm just a drummer percussionist. I think you are very talented. You have, I mean, even with drums, there's different like types of drums, and
Oh
then,
sure.
percussion is the different types of things. And like, you have all these like wind, what are those called? Windpipes, or
So
what's that in the back?
there's a vibraphone over here.
Oh, okay.
So so it's just basically so I'm glad you didn't call it a glockenspiel. So like but basically like mallet percussion instruments, where it's like notes like a piano. But
Oh, okay. Wow.
we hit it instead.
So I feel like those should count as other music talents.
Oh sure,
But
sure.
okay.
I don't play it very well. I play it like a drummer that hits things. But that's fine. I'm okay with that.
And I remember you mentioning in your on your website or your bio that you've always preserved this youthfulness to how you approach the instrument, which I think it's really awesome, because a lot of us think, oh, we're adults now and we should approach music with adult perspective. But
Right.
I think keeping a little bit of that youthfulness is really valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's youthfulness. I mean, it's probably a little bit regression, but whatever. But I started like when I was a kid, and of course, that's like the only thing that I've ever like really loved doing.
Wow.
Couldn't care less for anything else. But like, because I remember being like a little kid and just like wanting to just play drums all day and just like hours and hours. So it's like when I play,
Wow.
like I still get like a little bit of like that feeling. Even if it is like my job, quote unquote. Like sometimes like it's still fun to play. Like I can't imagine it like not being fun. Like if anybody like doesn't have fun playing drums, then I don't know, like they should they shouldn't be playing drums. Like they should seek help. But like so it's always fun. And then like, so I also I teach the drums, which I kind of get that a little bit like secondhand, like, because you see when somebody's like learning and like they just like for the first time can like nail a beat, or like the first time they can play like some like classic rock song, and you see like the joy of like, oh man, like I did that. So like I kind of like see that it's like, oh yeah, like it reminds
I
me
felt
in
like
some
that
ways.
once.
It's
Yeah.
like I remember that feeling like back
Aw.
20 something years ago. It's like, yeah, like it's cool, like when you can suddenly do something that you couldn't do the day before. It's like, yeah, I mean that's the drug basically. And then
I
that's
love that.
kind of never ends, like I mean, because there's always something, like any instrument, there's always something that you can't do, which is like humbling. It's like constantly humbling, but it's also like inspiring, because it's like, yeah, like I'm gonna like work on this thing, and then you get it, and it's like it's that same feeling all over again. It's like somebody learning like a beat for the first time. It's like, oh yeah, like now I can do this. It's like part of what I can offer as a drummer. So yeah, so that feeling, yeah, it's like being a kid every day. And this is like the kid in the candy store kind of thing.
Yeah, I can totally identify with that. I play piano since I was 4. I didn't continue it, but every time I go back to the piano or the keyboard, I have that same feeling of like when I first started, and or when I overcome a note or overcome a chord or something.
Mm.
I'm like, oh my gosh, like
So it started on the piano, and then it turned into singing for you.
yes. Well,
Got it.
singing has always been in the background. Because Asians, we love to karaoke. Like we all think we're rock stars at the karaoke room. So the love of singing really came from the family and came from those karaoke experiences. So singing has always been in the background, but professional training, came later.
Cool.
But yeah, I totally I can identify with those like feelings of when you're a kid, and yes, you're right. You have to love doing it, or else what is the point? Because you could be
Right.
doing anything else, you
Right.
know.
Exactly. Like, yeah, I mean, you don't do it for the money or the fame or whatever, or for the Instagram likes. I mean, you got to do it because like
Instagram likes.
I mean, kids these days, but you got to do it because you love it. And obviously, I mean, you love singing. I love playing the drums. And even if nobody was listening or whatever,
You still do it.
I'd still do it.
Yeah.
And that's I think key.
Yeah. So, what are your current projects? Like, what do you want the audience to know, to whether it's purchase your music or, what are your current projects?
So that's, so my solo work had always been kind of like on the side, or sometimes occasionally on the back burner, because most of the time I'm playing with other people, playing
Right.
on stage and things like that. So this year when like those things sort of kind of melted away a little bit, my solo stuff kind of like took a little bit more like of the foreground. So that's been my like so what used to be like this sort of like side thing is like, oh, like when I have time I'll work on this. Like
Yeah.
this year has been like yeah, like this is the thing I'm doing. So that's been like since March. That's been really like my primary thing. So I started recording my album Guardrails in March, and continue to record and produce and mix it all the way up to a couple months ago when I had it mastered and printed. So
Awesome.
the album is complete. I put out 2 singles so far on all the streaming things, and the album itself is coming out January 15th. There's pre-order information if anybody's interested at on my website andrewtoy.net. There'll be CDs and MP3s, and of course it'll be on all the streaming things as well. But yeah, that's been the main sort of like musical activity, and for the past better part of a year.
That's awesome. I think maybe it happened for a good reason because maybe your solo album needed to be in center stage,
Yeah,
sooner than you would have allowed it.
I appreciate that, because it's like, if you just say like, like, oh, I'll get to it when I have the time.
You never have the time.
It's never going to happen. But this year it's like, yeah, that kind of like, forced my hand a little bit. It's like, yeah, like the universe was saying, you've got the time, like do it. Like, so
it's like if you don't do it this year. Like,
right. I'm not going to do it when like things are like back to like their usual craziness. So yeah, it's been like we said before, kind of like a mixed blessing. Just having the time to like work on this stuff. I mean, obviously not to downplay all the severity of all the bad things this year, but
Right.
but selfishly, it was great to have that kind of like extra time this year. And then when things are back to have live shows and things like that, I'll be ready, and it'll be like a very different sort of show than what I'd done in the past.
What do you mean by that?
So so basically just like more ideas like in the mix, more like kind of developed, more refined kind of things. Where at first, and if you play live, you can maybe relate. Like at first, it's like, okay, like I just need to like have a solid 45 to 60 minutes of like material. Like I just need to like, have something where like, it's just like a set that doesn't suck and I got to get on stage and do it.
Yeah.
But then like, the more you do it, it's like, okay, like where can I trim the fat? Like what can go away? Like, does this need to be here? Whatever you distill things into, better music, and so it's like continuously just like kind of like that, like streamlining the show, adding new music, kind of refining things. So yeah, just so not like different per se, but just hopefully better, new and improved is what we're all going for.
Right. Like I understand what you're saying. Instead of just trying to fill the time, you're kind of putting the best stuff out there, maybe stuff from your solo album too. But it's really cool that you're doing a solo album because I don't see that a lot from drummers. I feel like drummers usually are forgotten about, which is really sad. Usually people, usually drummers kind of stay in the background, they get introduced or whatnot, but it's really rare to see them just kind of have a solo career or like do solo albums. And I think the reason is because a lot of them feel like they're just drumming, but you have other elements to add to.
Right. So there's definitely like this sort of like drummer like insecurity or imposter syndrome or whatever it is, where it's just like, oh, we're not real musicians. We just kind of hang out with musicians. Oh, I know, it's terrible. But that's but that's fine. I mean, of course, if we're trying to like approach something like a traditional album, like it's a struggle because like drummers don't tend to think in terms of chord progressions and lyrics and stuff like this like way like a real musician would. But we deal maybe more with sounds, more with textures, more with like things like that. So that's kind of what I built on while I was doing this. While I was working on my own music. Is just like what's the kind of music that I would want to hear as a listener? I know probably everybody says the same thing if they're putting out their own music, but this is the kind of stuff that I would want to listen to myself. Which doesn't mean like, another thing I wanted to make sure I didn't do was like make an album for drummers. Because, that's, that kind of doesn't interest me. Like, like somebody playing like some impressive like drum thing. It works for some people, maybe for some drummers, but to me, that didn't interest me. So yeah, it's not like I try not to turn anything into like a drum solo, for instance. I'm not trying to do anything like that. More about just like, building up like musical textures, musical tension, things like that. So yeah, hopefully not a typical drummer's album. If a typical drummer's album would be like some sort of like shred fest. I try to avoid that as well.
Yeah, no, I listened to it. I got a preview of it. And yeah, every track had its own flavor, its own style. I feel like they're all very different. I wasn't like bored of it.
Good.
So everybody should go and purchase and support and listen to Andrew's solo album. Okay, well, so can you tell the audience where they can find you? I know it's like all the streaming things
Sure.
and maybe Instagram, but just maybe let them know like what your main social platform is, and repeat your website again, and also what streaming platforms you're on.
Absolutely. So yeah, my website is andrewtoy.net, not .com, .net. And you can find everything through there, but I'm on all the main socials. It's all A Toy Drummer. Mostly, I get the most interactions on Instagram, but so I'm there, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, all those things. Yep, A Toy Drummer on all of those, streaming, Spotify, Apple Music, all the kind of primary ones. Deezer, Tidal, I don't even know what those are, but apparently I'm on those as well. But yeah, but for most people, yeah, I'm on Instagram and Spotify.
Awesome. And then this last question is actually for me because I'm a fashionista. Do you think about, your style, I guess like your music, fashion style at all? Like, is that something that's important to you?
Well, like how I present myself on stage and things like that.
Yeah, how you present yourself on stage, maybe your cover photos, for even just for Zoom calls or whatnot. Like,
oh, sure. No, I don't think about it too much. I try to on stage. I try not to distract from. So I almost every day I wear a black T-shirt. But
well, you did the hair today, so
yeah. Mohawk makes me extra cool, I guess. So thank you. But yeah, like as far as like visual style, yeah. I love kind of like the same way as music. I love like impressionism. I love like shadows. I love like different uses of light and dark and things like that. I know it seems pretty broad, but yeah, I just had some cool pictures taken. There's a great local photographer, Iman El Said, great photographer. So she kind of captured some of that. And my the cover to my album is actually a painting that I made a couple years ago, and it's meant to be a little bit kind of like ambiguous what it is. So I won't say what I was thinking, but but yeah, different uses of like obviously like shapes and colors and but kind of a little bit dark and murky at the same time.
Okay, that's fair.
Dark and murky. That's
dark and murky.
That's my style.
Well, I think like fashion style isn't just like on stage. A lot of times it's, people think about like bling bling, like stud leather jackets and sequins and all that, but not everybody has to do that. And I like what you brought up about impressionism, like how maybe you care more about like the color contrast, like how it plays with the lighting and different shapes and such. That is still fashion. So
yeah, and that's something that I'm trying to develop a little bit more. So when I play live, there's a lot of like electronic trickery that goes into it. So I automate a lot of stuff. So I'm playing everything live, but there's a lot of things that are kind of pre-scripted as far as like the sounds that you hear. Again, not pre-sampled, but kind of pre like kind of scripted, like what's going to happen in a show, and the lights are part of that. So I run my own lights from the drum set as I'm playing. So that's something too. It's just like getting like trying to match like a visual to like the sound. So like Yeah, because I think it's all related. Like it's not,
Right.
like a shallow thing. Like I think like the good visuals can like just make a music performance just like that much more powerful.
I agree.
And we've all
Totally.
been to like some shows where like you see it and you hear it, and it's like whoa, like that's like the whole package. So that's
That's right.
yeah, something that I kind of aim for. You know.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Andrew.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, it was really fun chatting with you and learning about, an awesome drummer in the DMV area.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Yes. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Cause I'ma dig deep, I'ma stand tall. I got the grit of the underdog.